Hello, I'm going to talk or I'm going to give answer to the following questions from the chapters 20 to 24 from the book. First, I'm going to talk about the impact that the NCX10 machine has into the process. If talking about this machine, we find that the impact that it has in the process is because it's a bottleneck, and it's the part of the process where we find that it's making the bottleneck, and to make the process to take longer. We found that one of the principal problems is the speed in which they give to the people who buy them. It's quite long. So here we find that this machine is the ones that make that the process takes longer than that it used to take. An example of this that I can relate from other different class is, for example, this Friday I was on a lab of another class, and we were making a productive process. Here we found that there were 4 different steps, and we were taking into account the time of the process. Then we found that one of the steps was quite faster. It took like 40 seconds to make each part, but the other process, who was the next, take more than 1 minute to make that part. So in a long uh, in a long time, we found that this time was start making a bottleneck. So in the first step that take 40 seconds, the parts start to become a lot. So the inventory start to get full of these parts. So we find that a good solution for this is to accumulate the speed of the production of this, for example, this part of 40 seconds. So this part of 40 seconds will make the production, taking into account the speed of the production of the next step, that is the one that take more than 1 minute. So if both productions take like the same range of time, it won't be a bottleneck, or we won't it will be a bottleneck, but we won't have these high inventories. For the second question, I'm going to talk about the strategies that we find in the chapter 21 to solve the bottlenecks, and I'm going to give one of some solutions. First, we find that the book gives us many solutions to solve the bottlenecks of the NCX10 part of the process. So first we find that one of the solutions is to reduce the interruptions of this process. So the NCX10 won't have any stop of the production, and they are going to be prepared to make this machine to produce in a continuous way. By the other part, we find to reduce the charge to this machine or to this step, uh, uh, eliminating the production of parts that aren't necessary. So this machine will only produce the parts that are necessary for the process. And finally, we find the book give us another solution, that is to put some quality controls before the process start. So the parts that get to this part of the process will already be checked and reduce the possibility to have a problem in this part. The solution that I propose is, sometimes a good option is to duplicate these parts of production if the economic part is able to give us the opportunity to make this solution. This because this is a solution that requires of a big quantity of money, but maybe the impact will be higher because we are eliminating the bottleneck and duplicating the production of these parts that takes too longer. But for this, we have to take into account the rest of the process. Maybe if we do this, so duplicate this part, we could present another bottlenecks in different parts. So it's a solution that isn't as good as it looks like. Another solution will be to stand, to, to get a third part that make this process. It isn't a good solution when it's a linear process, because if we have other steps with that parts, when we couldn't get a third person to solve this. For the third question, I'm going to talk about the strategy that we found in the chapter 22. Here we find that the strategy that the book gives us, or the strategy that they talk about, is to reduce the production batches by the half. So we found that first we have a batch higher, and it used to take a higher lead time. This because of the production of a higher batch was longer, but we find that here when we reduce this batch to the half, the speed of the process is quite higher. This principally because the lead time is shorter than the ones with the normal batch. So this represent as an increase in the sales and their earnings. So the company have a better production and a better way to solve these lead times and to give the final product to the companies that make these buys. For the fourth point, I'm going to talk about how the inventories, like the role that the inventories take into a productive process. I'm not going to take it into the context of the book. I'm going to take it in like more general part. Here we find that the inventories have as positive points as negative points. In each model, each production, we always want to have a small inventory. This because it represents a cost. When we have a higher inventory, we have a higher cost, but we are not able to have a zero inventory because we won't have like production reserves. We find inventories in production and when we finish the product. For example, we have the inventories when we buy parts of different places. Here we find that we need to have like a reserve of inventory, because of if by something we couldn't buy more parts, so we will have these inventories. And we find the inventories when we finish this process. When we finish the process, these parts go to this inventory. The idea is to reduce these inventories, because if we have a higher quantity of parts and people doesn't buy it, we will have the cost will have an increase. So we have to accumulate this production and these inventories by the demand of the product. If we see that the product has a higher demand, we're going to produce a lot and like to have the inventories in the same level of this. But if we find that the demand isn't as big as we expect, we will produce in smaller quantities and to have smaller inventories. The idea is that the inventory keeps rotating in a constant way, but here we find that the inventories will rotate depending on the product that we have. For example, if we have some food in the inventory, the idea is that the inventory keeps rotating in a very constant way. But if the product doesn't have like this time to be sold, it won't be a problem, but it will be by the part of the time, but it will be a problem by the part of the cost. Well, I'm going to talk about the fifth question, which is to talk about how to apply the concepts of quality control. Here we find that the quality control is something quite important because it helps us to be sure of what we are doing. I'm going to take the example of the last questions, which was the lab that I had last Friday. Here we find that the production was of 4 steps. For example, if the third step is a bottleneck and the second step product grown parts, the bottleneck will have more problems than that it have. So if we find that it is taking longer time than the other process and it's a bottleneck, if we give this a grown part, it will take longer and it will be a product that isn't useful, that is useless. So the importance of the quality control needs to be, or during the process, for example, in a process diagram, we find the operations and the control quality in one process. This by capacitating the people that is making this process. Or if we couldn't have this possibility, we are able to add these quality controls between each process. So when the person finish the process or the machine, there will be someone who check the parts, and if it is with all the things that are necessary to get to the other step, making that all the parts that get to that bottleneck part will be okay, so they won't have that kind of problems there. Finally, I'm going to give 3 questions that I made during the reading of these chapters. First, I'm going to talk about my first question is if it is better to have humans or machines doing a process. If it is always better to have a machine, or if sometimes it's better to have a human. Which are the advantages of each one? For the second question is as how good is to outsourcing some process. And finally, is the final question is if in a long time is it good to invest in additional equipment or additional machines for get a better process or eliminate bottlenecks. Thanks.